Good morning, lads. Today I have a secret to share with you. Some of you may already know this, and I don't want to overstate it, but there's one exotic out there that's a lot stronger than it seems on the surface. Today we're going to talk about the Gemini Jesters. Until recently, I thought Gemini Jesters were just an obnoxious exotic that mostly served to remind me why exactly the red team needs to be destroyed. As much as I've dealt with them so far, that's all there is to it. Nobody realized its potential. And I think part of it is just that people are generally of the same mindset that I am. That it's mostly annoying rather than actually useful. Kind of a psychological warfare-based exotic, if you will. Even so, when you consider on paper how taking away your opponent's radar for a few seconds can help your team, it has to sound at least decent, right? For instance, if you had a hunter with Gemini Jesters under the bridge on the middle of Cauldron, he could easily bait players into the room, dodge away their radar, and it would immediately be extremely difficult for his enemies to predict where reinforcements are going to attack from. They would have no idea at all. If you can get an enemy to commit to the push before you use your dodge, taking their radar will leave them defenseless against a coordinated follow-up from your teammates. The one team that managed to get some value out of Gemini Jesters on Anomaly against me followed that same basic format. Get as close as you can to an enemy while keeping a wall between you, dodge away the team's radar, then have your teammates push them from an angle they probably aren't looking at. If you can get enemies into a position like that where they don't have an option of just playing passively and backing up to see every possible way you could push, they have to make some really unfortunate choices about where to look, and it's basically free kills. Just so I've said it explicitly, Gemini Jester Misdirect does work through walls, and that is a huge part of what makes it not completely useless. This is one of those trademark Bungie abilities that rides the thin line between being genuinely overpowered since you can't do anything to stop it from happening, and being entirely useless since it's too specific in its scope of use so as to prevent that problem. It's kind of like Antaeus wards before they went from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde. Anyway, the critical bit in taking advantage of Gemini Jester is that the hunter using the Jesters to misdirect can't be the only one engaging the enemy team, because the Gemini Jester audio cue gives away his position, and that makes it kind of an average exotic if you're alone. It makes it pretty easy to look for that specific direction. In other words, the Jesters do not synergize much at all with teammates who are sniping. This is all old news, of course. Nothing I've said here is a game changer. And if that's all there is to it, then it's just an exotic that has a high skill ceiling when it comes to coordinating with your team, and it's probably more viable than it's given credit for on small maps. But that's about it, right? Well, that's what I thought, but after testing it out, that's not what I think now. As it turns out, Gemini Jester actually does a tiny bit of damage to enemies when you dodge with it on. This tiny detail is a huge deal, because all you have to do to win games is get 3 Gemini Jesters on, and then have them dodge in rhythm to kill their opponent over the course of about 100 collected dodges. You never even have to make eye contact. This strategy is totally foolproof, and it's only a matter of time before 3 Jesters is the meta. Nobody will ever get health back on the enemy team. Except that wouldn't actually work unless your opponent was stuck in a small space and couldn't back up out of it. I almost want to see it happen, but there's pretty much no way it ever could, since that would take like 5 minutes or so to actually finish someone off from full health. But in all seriousness, that little bit of damage does push the Jesters from annoying to viable at least. You know how Thorn can stop players from rezzing with its ticks of burn damage? So can Gemini Jester, except it can do that through walls and around corners while taking away their radar. So that silly concept I was telling you about a moment ago with 3 hunters just spamming their dodge to kill someone, that's not entirely impractical. If you're on a close range map and the enemy team has a revive that's behind cover but not too far away, you can disrupt and confuse their attempts at respawning the teammate really easily. At a minimum, you'll wind up delaying them, which gives you valuable time to reposition, but it wouldn't be unrealistic at all to scare people off the res, since they'll wind up standing out in what they feel is the open since they have no radar. The more oppressive a team is about misdirecting their opponents, the more likely it is to actually prevent a revive and swing around in your favor. Of course, you're probably not going to be able to prevent a revive indefinitely, but disorienting the enemy through walls and delaying them turns the dodge into a very powerful offensive tool. And unfortunately, the bottom line is that abusing this exotic with as many of them stacked onto one team as possible will almost certainly trip up the enemy team very badly just on account of how stressful having no radar is for extended periods in trials. It makes contesting close-range spaces look like a completely horrible idea. This exotic can work in an individual aggressive playstyle as well under the right circumstances. It winds up being way easier than usual to get free shots on enemies if they wind up in a fight with someone else after you misdirect them, because they don't even have a clue where to expect the enemy from. For instance, if I misdirect player A starts running away from me because they don't want to fight someone without radar, they run straight to my teammate who does have radar, my teammate expects them, player A doesn't expect my teammate, easy win for my teammate. It's also good for juking people by dodging as you run away from them, and then waiting a moment before turning around to shotgun them. If they feel confident in their push for any reason, it is easy to punish that confidence if you can take away their radar. While I'm talking about punishing confidence, I'd like to also mention that this exotic pairs well with an ability I am particularly not fond of, Camo. If you run Top Tree Night Stalker, your dodge turns you invisible to radar, which actually works really well with Gemini Jester, especially against teams that split up. If your enemy team splits up into a group of 2 and a solo player, you can run at the group of 2, dodge misdirect them to activate camo, and the last thing the solo player knows from his radar is that nobody is stopping him from flanking apparently. He pushes in to save his teammates, the very same ones he just heard get misdirected, only to immediately get face blasted by a shotgun because you camoed your way over to attack as soon as you finish dodging. In fewer words, camo works really well with this exotic because it allows you to simultaneously confuse enemies both with and without radar, which gives you a lot more strategic options in some cases, especially ones where the enemy team doesn't group up so you can get all 3 at the same time. I don't particularly like running this subclass, and you do give up a better super to use it, but it is a very strong synergy. On the same note, Gambler's Dodge for more throwing knives would probably be a pretty strong option for a bottom tree gunslinger, since you can get long-range one-shot picks without needing to equip a sniper and mismatch your playstyles for close-range dodges and long-range sniping. I didn't do that in any of these clips, but it would be my recommendation after having fooled around with it. And while I'm all in on this, I assume this goes without saying, but I should probably just say it for clarity, you definitely want to run 10 mobility for the reduced dodge recharge time, and I also ran double perpetuation mods for the same reason. I'm told you can put a Paragon mod on a year 1 piece of gear to further reduce the cooldown, but I destroyed all my year 1 gear, so I couldn't test that out. Anyway, point being, make sure that dodge cooldown is as short as it can possibly be, because you want to be as obnoxious as you can possibly be. Also, I'm not too sure about this specific bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if you won gunfights by misdirecting people before peeking them, just because having no HUD on your screen can be disorienting on its own. The more you keep your opponents starved for visual information, the harder it'll be for them to fight back. It's just a curveball that seems to throw them off. At least that's how it felt when I was playing with it. I say that with a big grain of salt because there's really no way you can be sure they wouldn't have missed shots anyway, but like I said, I did have a handful of fights where it felt like my opponents were panicking. A major benefit that I haven't talked about yet is the fact that dodging allows you to check for enemies in close proximity. When you dodge near enemies through a wall, you'll see damage numbers for the misdirect. Knowing that all 3 enemies are close to you when you see 3 2s appear is pretty helpful, and similarly, dodging and getting a hit can also give you a better sense of the fact that someone is sitting farther back than you might have assumed. That big swathe of red on your radar can mean an enemy is very close, but it can also mean they're just in the area but not that close at all. Gemini Jester can help you figure out the difference through walls. All this said, I'm personally of the opinion that Gemini Jester should not be able to interrupt reses. That's straight up whack-yo. I thought it was bad enough that interrupting reses is possible at all, considering how extremely easy it is to just kill the revived player anyway. But interrupting a res in a way that doesn't give your opponent any warning or counter options on their own is kind of just a bit much. I could see dying in the chaos that follows a Gemini Jester assault being frustrating to deal with very often, so I'm not really sure where I stand on this idea. I did notice that deliberately stopping the revive is not super easy to do, and it would definitely take some practice, but even if it is a bit hard to do, that doesn't make it fair to the enemy, and in any case, stopping revives is practical, it's just not quite as straightforward as it sounds. Similarly, I think this exotic is only actually strong if you and your teammates are already somewhat coordinated, regardless of skill level, because it gives you a window of opportunity to collapse on the enemy, and your teammates need to take advantage of that window. Coordination does matter for that. One particular quality about the Jesters that makes them actually fun to use is that they enable you to flank enemies in a way that I have never been able to at all otherwise in Destiny. I mean, even when we had no radar, I don't think I ever got strong flanks, quite like the Jester sometimes allowed me to. It makes it fun and strong on its own, but especially so if you have your teammates following up on those flanks, because that just turns into an easily won fight for your team. So do I recommend Gemini Jesters? On the one hand, it would be unbelievably annoying for triple Jesters to become a common thing to run into on small maps. That would make me want to get out of the playlist as fast as I could personally. That's just not fun to play against, to be honest. There's not a way to prevent the Jesters from making an uneven playing field, and when both teams use it, you just got a really chaotic matchup that is actually, in my opinion, pretty fun. But triple Jester teams would kind of be shamelessly abusing a slightly out of tune ability, and knowing Bungie, I wouldn't expect them to change it before Destiny 3, just because it can be a little problematic. Granted, it would still be a relatively small problem in the grand scheme of things, because even if you are trying to abuse it, you need to outplay your opponents to beat them. In that sense, it's annoying and strong, but still reasonably balanced. But maybe that'll seem less true if more people explore the possibilities it offers. So overall, I would definitely say try out Gemini Jesters if you already communicate with your teammates. If you can tell them that you're about to do it and get them prepared to push from an angle that the radar isn't going to give away as you're doing it, you will probably experience at least some success with it. And the bottom line of it is, even if you don't get anything out of it by dodging, you're still going to at least know where they are because you have the damage numbers on them, which is also nice. It can help you get away, it can help you juke enemies. There are a lot of things about it in small spaces that make it more viable than it's given credit for at a minimum. So yes, I would say it's worth trying out. All things said and done, I think Gemini Jester is strong enough as an exotic to maybe even be best in slot for hunters on small maps. And I only think having more of them on one team increases its strengths. If you're curious at all, definitely try playing around with it and see what you think. Let me know if you have similar results to mine. Thanks for watching, guys.